So I'm Tons, I'm a design for interaction student here, and for the project I designed a rental wheelchair system for amusement parks and zoos. So, do you want to know any more?
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay, and we designed a system that sort of looks at how easy parts of the park are for accessibility, and then sort of measuring it so that in the end the park becomes more accessible, so that for users they actually sort of steer to the places that are nice, and that the park sort of gets the idea of what are the good and the bad places, and can we maybe improve the bad places so that sort of it's more accessible for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm Chopka van Meulen. I'm also a DFI student, and I work together with Alex on creating a wheelchair for basketball users. We created a wheelchair which is designed for training and improving the training experience, where we mainly provide value in helping them train their intuition due to giving advice on where to pass to, monitoring their exhaustion during a match, to provide them with data that they can know, oh, maybe I'm overexhausted, maybe I should take it easy. And we gather data on their tires and their grip, so we could provide that back to companies and let companies give them advice on what kind of tires or what kind of grip they would personally need.
Okay.
Now, as Chopko said, I'm Alex. I work on the same basketball wheelchair.
You're actually an IPD student?
I'm actually an IPD student, because this is an elective, so we work on it with all three masters, DFI, SPD and IPD. We mostly focused on the training with the basketball wheelchair, because we were afraid that we would influence the actual play of the game too much if we were focusing on improving or, adding computers to their behavior during an actual match.
Yeah.
So this is a 3 ECT elective, and that basically means that you have about 1 day a week to work on the project, 8 hours for 10 weeks. And then you have reports, in our case a physical prototype, a poster and a little exam. And that's the team sizes are 3 to 4 people, so I guess that's 32 hours total per week.
Not to mention that sort of, I think half of the daytime went into lectures and sessions discussing sort of the design project and how you can improve it, and lectures on actual content or guest speakers. So that was sort of for a design student to get a rough idea of what it means to design for these sort of IoT products. So like the actual design time was like half of the, roughly half of the time that you mentioned before. So then it was 7 weeks, half a day a week.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
This course is just for IDE students, so initial design students. Although we we have 3 different masters with 3 different disciplines, where, to give a short explanation, one of our masters focuses on the people, the other is focused on the product as an integrated thing, and the third one is more focused on the business side. Although we're all design students, that already brings a different skill assets. Besides that, we also have other electives. We have minors. For instance, personally I did a minor in computer science to gain more access and more insights. That's actually where I met him, because we did it together. So there we have already a different perspective of knowing the basic and having programmed, like for instance a neural net before, knowing more in depth what that actually would mean. But since it was mainly a design course, it also ends up being mostly thinking about and actually creating a concept, and thinking about how this would manifest itself and what kind of would happen, what could happen, and what are the possibilities of, and how. And they encourage us to be as explicit as possible with the data and what kind of data you would need and how you would use that data. But since none of us have the expertise actually to go further, nor the time, it stays at that a relatively abstract level. It isn't put into practice. So the models that we have are mainly visual representations of actually the user interface, and not per se actual models where we could test with it or try it out, or we don't actually have iterations here because we don't have the capabilities purely to design such a thing or create such a thing and see the data and see what kind of data comes out. It's mainly theorizing based on experience we personally have before.
the focus of this course was on the design of a system and not so much on the actual building of a system. And that's what most of the time also was dedicated to just design something. And that was a bit of a hypothetical exercise in a way. Yeah.
That's not to say that we didn't focus on things like the data streams and who collects what data and how it's controlled in the network. So we did have to go somewhat into detail in where everything goes and how it should work theoretically, but we didn't have to like program anything ourselves.
For me, the learning point of view was part because of the topic, because like personally I would never design a wheelchair. So actually this context allowed you to sort of think deeper and also think about the complex system that it could be, because if it would have been something that you're more familiar with, probably you wouldn't have thought so thoroughly about it. And I think that was also part of the learning things, to sort of really go quite deep into what kind of stakeholders, how can we connect them, how can we create value for them through gathering data, and also like what data do you need and how do you go from that data to metrics and that kind of thing.
For me, it's also about a topic, because when I started, it was like, yeah, design an IoT wheelchair. I was like, what the hell is IoT got to do with a wheelchair? But it was in that way a really interesting exercise, because it's not the obvious one. And what my main learning thing, I guess, is that you got to think of values, and especially in quantifiable values. So what kind of value do you bring to whom? Where there were also some scary situations, or scary, the hypotheticals where we got papers from Netflix of what their value is and what their optimization is, which we as designers translate, okay, but what value do we want to provide to players? And when did we achieve this value? So how do we quantify this value into actual data? And then going all the way back to, okay, we need this kind of data, how do we gather that, how do we model that, and then all the way back. I think that's the main value of me, thinking from those values.
For me, I guess the main value was thinking of the chair as a system instead of a product. So we already have some experience in designing products, and I personally have already some experience with IoT or electronics and computers. But really going from this single product to having a system of connected chairs and what value it brings to different users. So not only the people in the chairs, but the people who produce the chairs and parts of them. People who, like in our case, we had a basketball wheelchair, we have who control the courts or the coaches. So it was really the system and the integration of the chair as a connected product in that system that was really a learning experience.
I think it would be interesting, like it would introduce new learning opportunities also, because that's a whole new level thing in itself. And like then you could actually get to something and you can actually learn from each other. I think that would be interesting as well, because now it was quite, even though we have different backgrounds, it was quite a homogeneous group, because we're all designers, and that has certain implications on how we think. And I think actually sort of, because I think now we got to the level that we designed something that we could sort of start talking with somebody else, but we never did that because that's not in the scope. But that would be interesting, like if you do what we did in more of a pressure cooker and then actually bring it to people and see whether it resonates. I think that would be interesting.
I guess the first thing that comes to my mind is validation. So we have a lot of ideas and a lot of suggestions and how things could work and what could happen and how data collection works and how you can interpret data and manage data. But we don't actually know. We're not data scientists, we're not computer scientists. We have a basic level of understanding of data and of electrical stuff and what kind of sensors work. But in a way, in collaboration and the design phase, a lot of validation in that regard would be interesting, that we can iron out a lot of issues before we even start to making a prototype. The scope of this course was really about the concept, but that's also left me a bit of disappointment, right? Because at one point, once you start working on something, you want to see it in action. And there are a lot of value can come from this interdisciplinary concept, where you actually have people where you can work together with to produce something and to see, but how does it actually work, and what actually implication does that have, and what did the value you think you could derive actually is derivable.
A lot of the stuff that we think up, we can't really validate, and it would be really helpful to have experts on that who could help us and learn themselves from us how to implement these ideas, and then we can all learn from like what we create together. We can really see if what we thought of actually works, because that is now a big question we have. We've came up with systems that seem logical to us, and we think that it might be possible, but we are not really sure. And we also, with just 3 of us designers in 10 or 8 weeks in our case, we don't really have the time to create any tests or prototypes to really see if it's true. So I think in that way it could be very helpful.
Like what I said about sort of that would introduce new learning goals, like that would definitely introduce new learning things, because we're definitely not used to that. Like only if you do, like for example, I'm doing research now with somebody who is in Denmark, so then you sort of get to know this collaboration and remote thing, but like normally you don't, because you always have this group and you can sort of meet with each other. So I think it could be interesting, because like especially later when you want to do stuff in academics or in practice, having to talk with somebody who's remote is like almost a given, because that's what we're sort of going to, that you can work from wherever you want, and that there are companies who don't have an office or that are spread over the entire globe. So I think it would be interesting to actually.
Okay. Any thoughts?
Well, for me, and as a design student, the concept of remote actually relatively scares me. And it's maybe a bit extreme, but the design process itself is such a collaborative thing where you have such quick thinking, and things somebody says prompts something new, and that's, especially when you're brainstorming or generating ideas, it's such a quick thing that once that happens through Skype, or when you're not, I mean, we're so used to, we get taught a lot of digital tools, but still we get our pens out and we draw, because that's the quickest way to convey an idea. And once you introduce remote in that dimension, that becomes really complicated, and I would be afraid that it would become just a validating thing, like, oh, I have this idea, how do you like that? But they have a lot of knowledge too, and they have a lot of ideas how things should be done too. So in that way, I think it would be a big challenge to actually collaborate and not just validate how to make a good wheelchair which provides good value with good sensors and good software.
Cool. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I think it would be a really cool learning opportunity. We do a lot of co-creation here at the university, but it's always everyone's physically present in the design process, and I think it would be really cool to see how it works when you're remote, because you do have the limitations of, for example, video calls or just audio calls. And I don't know, I don't really have experience with designing through that with other people, so I think it could be part of the challenge to figure that out, how that would work. Yeah.